Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is YAHMAD. Now we're going to be looking at part 2 from the Spreadsheets overview, and we're going to be starting off with the SUMIF function. So before I explain the SUMIF function, let me just remind you what the sum function does. So if I go to the previous slide, so in this cell here, the total cell, I'll enter a function equals sum to basically calculate all of these values in this range. So it's going to add up these values together. So equals sum adds up values from a range of cells. Okay, so if I go back to the SUMIF function now, SUMIF will only add if there's a criteria. So the if part is the criteria, so it's going to add from a criteria. So there's three parts to the SUMIF. First part is the range. So the range is basically where the criteria will be. Then you type in comma. The second part is a criteria. You can either write it within speech marks or you can reference to a cell. Comma, and then the last part is the sum range. The sum range is basically where the values will be added up from. Okay, so let's go to this example here. So we have sales in a cell here. If I do an equal sum, for example, this will highlight, or this will calculate all of the values within that range. So from E2 to E12. Okay, so it's not going to be a number, a pound. It's going to be a number value. What the SUMIF will do, the SUMIF will look at the criteria and will only add up the values which matches the contents of the criteria. So if the criteria is Sony, within this range here, the sum range is going to add up this and this if it matches with Sony. So let's start. So if I type in equal SUMIF, adds the cells specified by a given condition or criteria. So if I double click on SUMIF, and now it's really important we follow the formula. So before I can do anything, I need to highlight the range. So the range will basically be where the criteria is. So the criteria is going to be Sony, Samsung and Apple, and it falls within this range here. So first of all, I'm going to highlight this range here. I'm going to do this question two ways. The first way, I'm not going to use absolute cell referencing, and the second way, I will just show you the difference. Then if I type in comma, the criteria, I can either click on Sony or the cell containing Sony, or I can write it in speech marks, comma, and the next part is the sum range. Which range are we going to add from? So the sum range will be parallel to the range. So what's going to happen is if I just close the bracket and press enter, if I double click, so the blue part is referring to the range, okay? The green part is referring to the criteria, and the purple part is referring to the sum range. So anytime the contents of this range matches with the contents of this range, it's going to add those values. So in this example here, we're adding 23 to 54, which gives us 77. If I replicate this function, if I move it down, it may look like it's working, but if I double click now, you'll see the range has moved down, okay? And if we go to Apple, again, the range has moved down, okay? So that's not what we want. We want to lock the range into the correct position, okay? However, the criteria is fine if that moves down, because that's relative to this position. So what I need to do is I need to use absolute cell referencing to lock these two ranges in. So if I type in a dollar sign, if you can use a shortcut key F1 and F4, that's what you'd have to do, or Shift and F4. For some reason when I do record, it disables that. So the range has been locked in and the sum range has been locked in. So these two are absolute cell referenced and the criteria is relative. So if I press enter, and now if I replicate this function, and if I double click on Samsung, these ranges have remained in the same position, but the criteria is now relative to Samsung. Okay, so let's look at Apple. Again, the two ranges are range, and the sum range have stayed in the correct position, and the criteria is now relative to the position of this cell here, which contains Apple. Okay, so if I look at the next slide, you can see I've used absolute cell referencing to lock the two ranges in. So the range has been locked in, the sum range has been locked in, and the criteria is relative to its position. So as you replicate the function, it's going to look in the right position to get the criteria. So if I'm in this cell here, it's going to be looking in apple. Okay. So when the formula is replicated, the absolute cell reference cells will remain the same in the same position. Okay, so now let's look at average if. Average if is very similar to sum if. So again, if I go back to this slide here, if I was to type in equal average and highlight this range, it would basically work out the average from this range here, from this cell range here. But the average if uses a criteria similar to the sum if to work out the average. Okay, so the first part will be range. So you highlight the range and then you select a criteria again, like the sum if, and then rather than the sum range, this time it's the average range. So this is where you want to work out the average from. Okay, so you got three parts: the range, the criteria, and then the average range. So let me do an example here. So again, we're going to refer to the same column. So there's three parts to the function. Okay, so the first thing we need to highlight is the range. So let's look at our criteria: Sony, Samsung, and Apple. It falls within this range here. I'm going to do the cell referencing now just to save myself time. Comma. The criteria is this cell here, which will be relative. So when I do replicate, it's going to move position. Comma. And the average range is here. Okay, so again, this needs to be absolute cell reference because I will be replicating the function. And if I close the bracket, so you can see there's three parts. You got the range, then you got the criteria, and then you got the average range. Okay, so yeah, so we can press enter, and then we can replicate this function. So what we have here is basically we have two values from Sony. Okay, so these values were added together and then divided by 2. And again, this is the average from Samsung, and this is the average from Apple. If we go to this example here, so let me just press enter. This is what a typical exam question will look like. So in cell D3, sorry, wrong question. In cell E3, use a function to add up the total number of days, and use the duration column booked for each destination. So we need to use up this column here, and we need to basically sum up the days for each destination. Okay, so we can use this code here. So this will be the criteria, this will be the range, and this will be the sum range. So this is a sum if because it's a criteria. We're not adding up all of the values, we're adding up values according to the destination. So if I type in equals sum if, as the cells specified by given conditional criteria. So the range will be, first of all, I need to identify my criteria, which is BRA, IND, USA, which falls within this range here. So because I'm going to be replicating this function, I'm going to lock these cells in. Okay, comma. The criteria will be relative to its position, so I don't need to lock this cell, comma, and the sum range, we have to use the duration column to find out the total duration for each destination. And again, we need to absolute cell reference this range here. And if I close the bracket, okay, and let me drag this down. So these values will basically come from what's happened is we're looking this range, okay, for this matching criteria, so BRA, and then anytime you see BRA, it adds that value. So we add that 10 to 14, and then we go down to the next one to this 10 and 14 and so forth. Okay, and then the next one we'll look in the same range, okay, for this criteria IND. And anytime it sees IND, it will add up those values. Okay. Now let's look at the what we have to do here. So we have to again use an average if. So in cell F3, use a formula to calculate the average duration of the holidays booked to this destination. So because we have different destinations, we have different criteria, it's not going to be equal average, it's going to be average if, because we have different criteria. Again, very similar to the sum if. So if I type in equal average if, okay, again it's 3 parts to the average if: range, criteria, and the average range. Again, identify your criteria, which is the code here, which falls within this range. You can lock this into place. Comma, the criteria again will be the destination, which will be relative referencing, and the average range will come from the duration column again. So if I absolute, I close the brackets, so that's the average duration for each trip. Okay, so 11 days, and again we can format this into a specific number of current decimal places. So we can go to a number and we can select the number of decimal places here, or you can use a roundup function, which we'll be showing you later. Okay, so if I come back to the presentation, so we've looked at sum if. Sum if is when you add with a criteria. And then we've also looked at average if, and with both functions we use absolute cell referencing to lock in the range and the average range or the sum range, and then the criteria is normally a relative referencing. So here's some questions for sum if. Okay, so in cell C2 use a function that includes both absolute and relative referencing to calculate the sum of minutes column if the S code column matches the or contains GBA. Okay, so we are calculating the minutes and we have a criteria. Okay, again, the next question, D2, use a function to add the total number of days using the duration column booked for each destination. So that was this example here. Okay, so again we have criteria. So when you add in with a criteria, you're going to either use a sum if. If you're working at the average, then it obviously will be an average if. If we go back here, so you need to be able to identify the key parts of the question. In this question here, add the total number of days using the duration column for the holidays starting in the month of January. So again, the criteria will be the month. Okay, so let me have a look. So I'll quickly do this one here. The month code refers to these values here. Okay, and obviously you start from 1 to 12. So I'll quickly do it again. So 1, 2. So now I have a criteria which will match this range. Okay, and what we need to do for this last question, if I go back to this one here, add a total number of days using the duration column for holidays starting in the month of January. Okay, so it's the same question as here. So again, it's going to be sum if. The range is basically where the criteria falls into, so it's going to be the month. We lock this in, comma, the criteria now will be the month starting with January, which is relative, and let me double check, is it using a duration column? Yeah, using a duration column. So the tip is to ensure the range and sum range are parallel to each other. Okay, so basically what happens is it looks up, for example, 1, and it adds up the values from that 1. So it's basically looking across. Okay, so they have to be parallel to each other. If we close the brackets, press enter, and then if I drag it down, so as you can see, in total 21 days was spent in the month of January. So it basically would add up this value here. So we've got 14 plus 7, which gives you 21 days. Okay, we're now going to be looking at if statements. Now there's three parts to the if statement. The first part would be the logical test, the second part would be if it's true, and the third part would be if it's false. So now let's look at this first example here. So if the unit sold is more than or equal to the target sales, then the target has been met. So let's have a look at here. So this is how many units we sold for this particular DVD or TV show. This was the target we had to achieve. Okay, so the first part of the if statement is the logical test. So we're checking if this cell here is greater than or equal to this cell here. So if the unit sold is the same or more than the target, the true statement will be on target. Now in this case it's true because we've sold more units sold than the target. However, if this statement is false, so let's say the unit sold was 10, then this is no longer true anymore, it's false. So this false statement will be printed instead. So the first part is a logical test. So is the unit sold more than or equal to the target sales? If the statement is true, then the true statement will be printed in the cell. If the statement is false, then the false statement will be printed in the cell. So now let me do one example. Okay, it's a very similar example actually. So what we have here, we have different mobile phones, okay? And this is how many phones have been sold for each particular brand and model. So what we want to say is, are we under target or are we on target? Now the criteria is, if we sell less than 20 phones, then we're under target, okay? So obviously the first one you can see is more than 20 phones, so it's going to be on target. So let's start the formula. So if I type in equal if, so for the logical test you've got to click on the cell you want to check. So if the sold is less than 20 sales, okay, to move on to the next part you need to type in comma. So now we're on true part. So if this is true, we're going to say under target. Okay. However, if this is not true, if I want to move on to the false, I type in comma, and the false value will be on target. And then if I close the speech marks, close the bracket. So before I press enter, I'm expecting to see on target, because this logical test is no longer true. So this value is not less than 20, therefore it's not a true statement. The false statement will be shown. However, if I replicate this function, for the next cell, we've only sold 4 phones, so we are under target. This one's on target, because obviously we sold more than 20 phones, okay? The next set of cells are under target, as you can see. Let's do one more example. So we have some employees, and we have hours worked. So they're either going to be a full-time or part-time employee, based on the number of hours they've worked. If they've worked less than 25 hours, then we're going to say they're part-time. If they haven't worked less than 25, they worked more, then they will be known as full-time. So again, we type in equal if. So it checks whether a condition is met and returns a value if true, and another value if false. So the logical test, we have to check the hours worked, and the criteria is less than 25. Comma, if the hours worked is less than 25, then we're going to say part-time. Close the speech marks. Okay, I can't move to the false until I type in a comma. So if it's not less than 25, then we're going to say they are full-time. So again, before I press enter, I'm expecting to see full-time for Ahmed, because obviously he's worked more than 25 hours. And if I replicate, now if I change this to 25, it's still going to show me full-time, okay? Because in the formula we said less than 25. If I do less than and equal to 25, so anyone who's worked 25 hours or less, they will be known as part-time, and I'm expecting this to change, which it has in this case now. So that's the simple if statement, okay? We can also do if statements with calculations, okay? So as you can see, we have a logical test here. So if I zoom in, so if they are receiving the student discount, so does the cell in D4 equal yes? If it does, then what we have to do for the true statement is work out 10% of the price. So to work out 10% of the price, it's basically going to be the price multiplied by 10%. Okay, to work out the discount value. So we're in this cell here and we want to work out how much discount they're going to get. If D4 is not equal to yes, okay, then we're going to return a false statement which will be 0. So if the student discount has been given, yes, then for the true statement you have to calculate 10% of the price, which will be 10% multiplied by the price. So the price is in C4. This will be the value for the student discount. If the student discount does not contain yes, then the false value 0 will be shown instead. So let me do the next example. Okay, let me just apply currency. So we need to work out the new salary. Okay, we have sales targets here. So what we're saying, if the employees have sold more than their target, so the target is here, so this guy Ahmed has sold more than his target, then for the true statement we have to add £500 to the current salary. Obviously, if they haven't sold, Sarah hasn't sold more than the target, then the salary will remain the same. So if I type in equal if, the criteria is we're checking to see if the sold is more than or equal to their sales target. So if they sold 20 or more, and if it's true, what we want to say is we want to add 500 to the salary. So we can either type in this cell here and type 500, or we can reference to this cell here and lock it in, because when we replicate, I don't want the contents of this cell to move to any other position. If it's false, the salary will remain the same. And then if I press enter, you can see this salary has gone to 1500, obviously because the target was met. If I change this to 19, it goes down to 1000. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at nested if. So nested if will contain more than one true statement. In this example, the delivery type will be either A, B or 3. So the nested if will check the first logical test. If the first test is false, then it will check the next logical test. If both tests are false, then the false value will be shown. So let's look at this example here. So we're going to be referring to this sheet here. So basically we've got different delivery types. We've got A, B and 3. So if the delivery type is A, then the cost will be £3.50. If the delivery type is B, then the cost will be £4.50. Obviously if it's not A or B, then the delivery cost will be 0. It'll be free. Okay, so if we go back to my presentation, so how it works is the logical test will basically check the criteria in this cell if it matches A. Okay, if it matches A, then we're going to say £3.50. Okay, if it doesn't match A, then we check the next condition. So the next condition is to check if this cell contains the letter B. If it contains the letter B, then the true statement will be 450. If both of these logical tests are false, then this statement will be shown instead. So let's go ahead and do this example. So equal if. So we have multiple conditions. So the first logical test is going to be on this cell here. So D4. What we want to say is if D4 is equal to A. So we have to put A into speech marks because it's text. And if that's true, the delivery cost will be £3.50. So don't put £3.50 into speech marks because you won't be able to apply formatting like currency. So comma, okay, bold and false has become bold, but we have another condition to check. So we type in if. Okay, the second logical test is going to be, again, the same cell is now equal to B. And if this cell here is equal to B, then we're going to say the delivery charge is £4.50, comma. So the first condition is we're checking to see if this cell contains A, and if it's true, we'll say £3.50. If that's not true, the second condition is we're checking to see if this cell contains B. If this cell contains B, then the true statement will be £4.50. Obviously, in this case, A and B are both false values. So this will be shown instead. So the false value is 0. Now what you need to do is close the brackets until you close the black bracket. So this is a green bracket, and we have to close the brackets until we close the first bracket, which is black. And if I press enter, I'm expecting to see 0. If I replicate this function, when I see A, I expect to see £3.50. When I see B, I expect to see £4.50. Now we need to change the formatting to currency. Okay, so make sure you select currency rather than accounting. Right. Now we're going to be looking at the next example. Okay, so this is from the November 2014 question paper. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is read the question. So in cell F27, use a formula to calculate the discounts using the subtotal, the number of units, and the 3 discount rates A, B, and C. Then we have to multiply the subtotal by discount A if less than 5 units are sold, discount B if between 5 and 19 units are sold, discount C if 20 or more units are sold. So the first step we should take is to identify which cells will be used for the formula. So I've highlighted the number of units. Okay, I've highlighted the 3 discount rates, which are A, B, and C, as you can see here. And I've also highlighted subtotal. So if we go to the example, you can see the number of units has been highlighted, the discount A, B, and C has been highlighted, and the subtotal has been highlighted. So I know I need to use these cells at some point in this formula. If we go back to the presentation, the next step is to identify which cell will be used for the logical test. So I've identified B12, number of units. So as you can see here, in each criteria, we're looking at the total number of units which are sold. Okay, so units sold, units sold, units sold. So if we go back to here, we're going to be using this cell here, which is calculating the total value of these cells, or these values, to give us 31. So the mistake people could do is they refer to these cells rather than referring to the total number of units sold. So this cell we use for the logical test. Okay, now we have to identify the logical test and the true conditions, and then we have to identify the false condition. So now we're going to be looking at working out the true and false conditions. So multiply the subtotal. I'm going to leave that at the end. So the subtotal, we can come to that later on. The first thing I need to work out is going to be the discount values, if it's going to be discount A, discount B, or discount C. So we can look at the subtotal at the end. So if I go back to the PowerPoint, let's look at the first criteria. It's going to be discount B if the unit sold is less than 5. Okay, so if B12, which is the logical test, is less than 5, then we're going to refer to B15, which is this cell here. Okay, that's the first condition. Now the next part, this is where people get confused with, and now I'm going to use this diagram to explain. It says discount B if between 5 and 19 inclusive. 19 inclusive means to include 19. So look at this diagram here. The first criteria, if the value in B12 is less than 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, then we're going to say discount A. The second part, let's just focus on the highest value. So the highest value is going to be including 19. So we can say if B12 is less than 20, then it's going to be B16. Automatically, it's going to capture any values between 5 and 19 because the first condition checked to see if the value was less than 5. Okay, if the value is not less than 5, then we start from 5 going all the way to 20. So, all the way to 20. So basically this condition will capture numbers from 19, 18, 17, going all the way down to 5. So we only have to focus on the less than part. So B12 is less than 20, then it's going to be B16. So if it's not discount A, if it's not discount B, then it has to be discount C, which is in B17. Okay, so let's have a look. And let's start typing the formula now. So if I type in E equals if, so if we click up here, the first logical test will be B12 is less than, let me check, less than 5. Okay, if I go back, then If it's true, we're going to refer to discount A. We don't need to lock in the cell because we're not dragging it down. Comma, if, let's check the second condition. Again, we use the same cell for the logical test. So this cell here is now less than, and again, focus on the highest value. So we don't need to look at 5 because it's 19 inclusive. We can say less than 20. Okay, and by default, it's going to capture any numbers within this range here. So if it's less than 20, which is 19 inclusive, the true statement will be discount B. Okay, so if it's not discount, so I clicked on the wrong cell, discount B. So if it's not B15, discount A. If it's not B16, discount B. Then the false statement has to be discount C. So let's just read the question. So discount C if 20 or more units are sold. So this will capture anything else, okay? So let's click on discount C. I'm going to close the bracket. So remember, we close with a black bracket. So the first bracket was green. So you always want to close the black bracket, which is the first bracket. And if I press enter, we have the discount value. So the discount value we have here is 0.15, which is because the total number of units sold was 31, which is not less than 5, so it can't be discount A. It's not greater than 5, but less than 20, so it can't be discount B. It's greater than 20, so automatically it's giving me the discount C value. Now we can look at a subtotal, and we can multiply the discount by the subtotal. So the subtotal was in F26. So the reason I've highlighted the cell, so if I double click on the formula, you can see we've used the total number of units as a logical test. We've used different discount values. The cell we haven't used is a subtotal. So that's a quick reminder. You need to finish off the formula. So if I multiply now the discount value by the subtotal, this will give me the final value. Okay, so that's the discount amount. Okay, so now let's look at some nested if questions or if statement questions. The first question we have here, in cell D11, use a formula to return n if the value in a minutes late column is less than or equal to 0, or to return y if the value in a minutes or late column is greater than 0. This is just an if statement because you only have one true and one false statement. Now in this next example, which was from November 2015, I think, in cell H4, enter a formula to display the word yes. So that's the first condition. If the hours worked are greater than the contract hours, display the word no if the hours worked are the same as the contract hours. So we've got the two true statements. Or display the word incomplete if the hours worked are less than the contract hours. So this is a statement here. So if hours worked is equal to the contract hours, we're going to say, oh sorry, we start off here. If the hours worked are greater than the contract hours, then we say yes, comma. If the hours worked are equal, the same as the contract hours, we're going to display the word no, then a false will be incomplete. So this is an example of a nested if. Again, we have a nested if question as well. In cell E3, enter a formula to display the viewing cost if a local taxi is used, if the distance to the property is, so again we focus on the less than part, so less than 5 kilometers, then comma, the true statement will be 2, 5 kilometers or more, or less than 15. So again we focus on the less than part, so the logical test will be less than 15, and then the true statement will be 5, then the false statement will be shown as 10. And here we have some more examples of nested if statements. We have multiple conditions. Okay, so in this case we've got 1, 2, 3 true statements and then a false statement. In this example here, we have to add £10,000, but that's something we can add at the end of the formula. So again, focus on the less than part. So if the property has an area square foot of less than or equal to 500, so that's your logical test, then the true statement will be 5% of the price. If the property has an area square foot greater than 500, ignore that part, focus on the less than part. So if it's less than 4,000 square feet, then the true statement will be 7.5 multiplied to the price, and then a false statement will be 10% multiplied by the price. Okay, so when you are doing these questions, if I go back to my PowerPoint, focus on the less than parts of the statement. So the first step, identify which cells will be used. Okay, identify the cell which will be used for the logical test, because if I come back to here, the logical test will be in each condition, it will be the same. The only thing that will be different is going to be the criteria and then the true statement. Okay, for the false statement you don't need to include any criteria, and then if there's something you can do at the end, you can close the brackets, check if the first part is working. First part was working, it gave me 0.15 because it was more than 20, so it was discount C, and then you can complete the formula after you check the first part is working. So before we move on from nested ifs, we'll do one more example from November 2016. So the question is, in cell G6, which is this cell here, let me just highlight it, enter a formula to calculate the advertising cost, which is the rate, which is this one here, multiplied by 25 if the resort has 50 rooms or less. So we need to look at the number of rooms. So the logical test will be this cell here, F6. So 25 if the resort has 50 or less rooms, 75 if the resort has 50 but less than 101 rooms, 150 if the resort has 100 but less than 201 rooms, and then 200 if the resort has more than 200 rooms. Okay, so let's look at this table here, for example. So the first criteria, so logical test is going to be F6. So if F6 is 50 or less, then the value will be 25. Okay, at the end we're going to multiply by the rate. Okay, it's going to be 75 if the resort has more than 50. So if it's not less than this amount here, then automatically we start from here, but less than 101 rooms. So if the value falls within this range, so F6 is less than 101, then we're going to say 75. We're going to say 150 if the resort has more than 100, so automatically we're going to be, if it's not in this range and if the number is not within this range, then we start from this range here and we go all the way to this part here. So if it's less than 201, then the value will be 150. Then the false will be 200. So let's start the formula. So if I type in equal if, so it's always good to plan out the answer before we start typing it in nested if. So the logical test is going to be this cell here, F6. So if F6 is 50 or less, so less than or equal to 50, then we're going to say 25. So that's the first condition. If the same cell logical test is going to be F6, it's less than, so it's more than 50 rooms but less than 101 rooms. So if it's less than 101, then we can say 75, comma, if, and again let's just focus on the less than part. So more than 101 but less than 201, so F6 is less than 201, then we can say 150, and then the false will be 200. So we don't need to type in any condition. We can close the bracket. So remember, we have a purple bracket here, a green bracket and a black bracket at the start. We need to close the brackets until we get back to the black bracket. So if I press enter, okay, so we have 25. It's 25 at the moment because this value is 50 or less. Okay, so it meets the first criteria. Okay, if I drag this down, just for now, I'm not finished yet. This is showing 75 because obviously the room is not less than 50, it's not 50 or less, so it falls within this range here. Okay, we have 150 here. It's showing 150 because it's not 50 or less, it's not less than 101, so now it falls within this range here. And 200, so we got 200 here because we have 250 rooms. So again, it doesn't fall within these ranges here. The room number is 250, so therefore the false value is shown. So now what I need to do is multiply by the rate, okay? So as you can see, this has not been used yet. So if I click on after the brackets, multiply, and select the rate. Okay, so before I replicate this formula, what I need to do, I need to lock this rate into place. So when I replicate, this rate has to stay in the same place. So I can insert the dollars. Obviously, you'd use the shortcut keys F and F4, Shift and F4. So if I press Enter, and now if I replicate, this is now the completed formula for this question here.